For him, it was the end of the world. A monster had emerged from the smoke to claim him. But sometimes salvation arrives in the most terrifying disguise. This is the story of how a meeting in the heart of hell gave two lonely souls a home. The world was gone. In its place was a roar and a crackle. Instead of air, there was acrid hot smoke that scratched at the throat and made tiny lungs burn. Under an old sofa, in the last island of relative safety, a small ball of fur trembled. He didn't understand what fire was. He only knew that his world, a warm apartment, a soft carpet, and the gentle hands of his human, had turned into hell. The walls groaned. Something heavy crashed in the next room, and the floor beneath him shuddered. He pressed himself deeper, huddling against the dusty leg of the sofa, his quiet, desperate squeak no louder than the whisper of falling ash. Outside, in a chaos of flashing lights and shouts, firefighter Jake of Engine 15 moved through the smoke. His radio crackled in his ear, but the loudest sound was the roar of his own breathing in the mask. His job was the secondary sweep, to make sure no one was left inside. According to reports, all residents had been evacuated. He moved quickly, methodically, just as he'd been trained. The beam of his powerful flashlight cut through the swirling gloom, snatching the charred remains of someone's happy life from the darkness. Living room, kitchen, bedroom, clear. Time to go. He had already turned toward the exit when he heard it. The sound was at the very edge of hearing, a thin, plaintive squeak, nearly drowned out by the roar of the flames and the hiss of his own breathing apparatus. Jake froze. The protocol demanded he leave the unstable building immediately. Every second in here was critical. But something in that sound, in that tiny note of desperate life amid the all-consuming death, pierced the armor of his professional duty. He moved toward it. From the kitten's point of view, a monster emerged from the smoke. A huge, dark silhouette with a single burning eye and a hissing, mechanical breath. It was moving right toward him. The kitten froze, his small heart hammering so hard it felt like it would burst from his chest. He flattened himself against the floor, bracing for the end. But the monster didn't crush him. It stopped, and the bright beam of light pinned him in his hiding place. Jake dropped to one knee. The movement was slow, almost balletic, a stark contrast to the chaos raging around them. Through the soot and smoke, he saw two terrified little lights, the kitten's eyes reflecting his flashlight. He was tiny, covered in soot, and trembling with fear. For a second, Jake hesitated. Then he did something the manual would never approve of, something dictated not by duty, but by something far more ancient and essential. Slowly, very slowly, he pulled the heavy protective glove from his right hand. Reaching under the sofa with his massive, soot-stained palm, he touched the matted fur with his fingertips. The kitten flinched, but didn't pull away. In this world of fire and pain, it was the first touch that carried no threat. It wasn't the touch of a giant. It was gentleness. For the kitten, the world shrank to that single point of contact, the fingertips on his fur. His last instinct for survival battled with a new, strange feeling. This hand, belonging to the huge, hissing monster, wasn't causing pain. It was warm, steady. There was no menace in it. And in that moment, surrounded by roaring flames, he made his choice. Instead of recoiling in terror, he took a tiny, almost imperceptible step toward the hand. It was a silent yes. The crackle of beam overhead snapped Jake back to reality. There was no time. He carefully cupped his hands, creating a cradle, and scooped up the weightless body. The kitten didn't even make a sound, only pressed himself deeper into his palms, seeking refuge. Now came the main problem: how to carry him out. He couldn't just hold him. He needed both hands free at a moment's notice. In that instant, for Jake, there were no instructions, no protocols. There was only this warm, trembling bundle in his hands. He acted on instinct. Unfastening the top clasps of his heavy turnout coat, he created a small pouch against his chest. Gently, as if handling the most precious jewel, he placed the kitten inside, against his sweat-soaked t-shirt. Then he fastened the coat again. He wasn't saving property. He was saving a life. A tiny, almost weightless life, but a life nonetheless. The kitten's world changed again. The roar and heat were replaced by a cozy darkness, a muffled, rhythmic thumping, and the smell of soot, sweat, and something else, something alive. He was in a warm, safe cave, while the world outside fell apart. He could feel his new carrier moving with confidence, and for the first time in long, terrifying minutes, the instinctual terror began to recede, replaced by an all-consuming exhaustion. He curled into a ball and surrendered to fate. Jake moved toward the exit, fast and focused. He wasn't alone now. The responsibility for the small life gave his steps a new purpose. He passed through the doorway just as the living room roof finally gave way, sending up a shower of sparks. A few more steps down the smoky hallway, and there it was. The blessed rectangle of the exit. The cold night air hit his face like a benediction. Jake ripped off his mask, gasping for oxygen. Around him, his crewmates bustled. Hoses were coiled and radios crackled. He stepped aside, toward the engine 15 truck, away from the commotion. His captain, Mike, a grizzled veteran with a gray mustache, walked over, clapping him on the shoulder. "All clear, Jake? You took your time in there." Jake nodded, catching his breath. Then, with an uncharacteristic gentleness, he unfastened his coat again. From the folds of the fabric, a tiny, soot-covered face with huge, frightened eyes peeked out. The kitten blinked, dazzled by the flashing emergency lights. Mike stopped mid-sentence. His stern face softened for a second. He looked from the grimy kitten to his tired, soot-covered firefighter. Then he grunted, a surprising warmth in his voice. "So that's what you were up to. Well, you saved him. Guess it's up to you what to do with him, hero." Jake looked down at the tiny creature trembling on his chest. "Up to you what to do with him." Captain Mike's words hung in the cold night air. The protocol was clear: hand the animal over to animal control. Take it to a shelter. It was the right thing to do, the logical, professional thing. Jake had followed the rules his entire life. They saved lives, his own and others. But now, looking into those enormous eyes, full of silent trust, he felt that the rules didn't apply. This kitten had been through the fire with him. He wasn't just a rescued animal. He was his. He gently lifted the kitten from his coat. He was so small, he fit entirely in Jake's palm. Jake inspected him. His fur was black with soot, but you could see hints of ginger underneath. He was whole, unharmed, apart from the lingering smell of smoke. The kitten lifted his head and, mustering his strength, let out a soft, hoarse squeak. It wasn't a cry of terror, but more of a question. What now? Around them, the work continued. The crew was packing up equipment, dousing the last of the flames on the roof. But for Jake, this whole world of activity ceased to exist for a moment. All he saw was this tiny speck of life in his hand. He thought of his empty apartment, the one he returned to after every grueling shift, the silence he usually filled with the sound of the TV. And suddenly, the thought of giving this creature up to a faceless shelter felt unbearable. A betrayal. "Hey Jake, got a name for him?" a voice called out. It was Kevin, the youngest member of the crew, walking over with a bottle of water. Jake shook his head. "Well, he's covered in soot like he crawled out of a chimney." "How about Ash?" Kevin suggested with a smile. "Ash?" Jake looked at the kitten. Yes, he was born of ash, but he was alive. He was a symbol, not of destruction, but of survival. A symbol that even when everything else burns to the ground, something precious can remain, something worth fighting for. "Ash," Jake said quietly. The name fit perfectly. The kitten, hearing his voice, squeaked again and tried to nuzzle Jake's finger. In that moment, the decision was made, final and irreversible. "I'm keeping him," Jake said, more to himself than to Kevin. His voice was firm. Kevin whistled. "Seriously? What about your allergies?" Jake smirked. "I'll live." He found a cardboard box that had held water bottles, poked a few air holes in it, and lined it with a clean cloth from the first aid kit. Carefully placing Ash inside, he set the box on the passenger seat of his old pickup truck. When the work was done and the crews began to leave, Jake took one last look at the blackened skeleton of the building. That night, he had gone in to fight a fire. He came out having found something more. The whole way home, he drove slowly, afraid to disturb his tiny passenger. A soft, contented purr emanated from the box. When he got home, the first thing he did was pour a little milk, thinned with water, into a saucer. Ash, whom he had carefully lifted from the box, didn't understand what to do at first. But then, catching the scent, he tentatively dipped his nose into the liquid and began to lap it up greedily, getting his nose and whiskers comically messy. Jake sat on the floor of his quiet kitchen and watched this little miracle. And for the first time in a long time, his apartment didn't feel empty. The first few days in Jake's apartment were a new world of discovery for Ash. A world without fire and smoke, filled with strange but pleasant smells and sounds. Jake's huge boots, which he left by the door, became perfect caves for playing. The laces were the best prey in the world. The rustle of a grocery bag meant something delicious would soon appear in his bowl. And the deep, rhythmic thumping he had first heard pressed against his rescuer's chest was now the constant background to his life. It was the sound of the heart of the man who had become his entire universe. Jake, in turn, discovered that his established bachelor life was being joyfully turned upside down. His mornings no longer started with the harsh ring of an alarm clock, but with the persistent nudge of a wet nose against his cheek and a soft purr directly in his ear. Returning home after a grueling 24-hour shift, he no longer collapsed into a chair in front of the TV. Instead, he would sit on the floor, and a little ginger hurricane would immediately leap into his lap, demanding his share of affection. The allergies Kevin had mentioned did flare up, but Jake just bought a pack of antihistamines and decided it was a small price to pay for this much happiness. But Ash's true home became Engine 15. Jake couldn't leave him alone for a whole day, so the little kitten in his cardboard box became a regular passenger in his pickup. At first, the crew treated it with humor, but soon the tough, fire-hardened men transformed into doting caretakers. Captain Mike, pretending to just be walking by, would accidentally drop a piece of turkey from his sandwich near Ash. Kevin built him a toy from an old rope and a bottle cap. Even the ever-grumpy mechanic Dave, who seemed to love only his wrenches, was spotted quietly stroking the sleeping kitten when he thought no one was looking. Ash became their mascot, a living, purring symbol of what they risked their lives for. Before every call, one of the crew would come over and scratch Ash behind the ears for good luck. And when the siren blared and the truck roared out of the station, the kitten wasn't scared. He would simply climb onto the old armchair in the break room, curl into a ball, and wait. He knew his human, his savior, would always come back. A year passed. The small, terrified ball of fur had transformed into a graceful, confident ginger cat with a glossy coat and bold green eyes. He would nap on the dashboard of the fire engine while it was being washed, inspect the food supplies in the kitchen, and comfort the firefighters after especially tough calls, simply by curling up next to them and starting his soothing, purring song. One evening after a quiet shift, Jake was sitting in the break room. Ash, as usual, was asleep on his lap, his side rising and falling rhythmically. Jake looked at him and remembered that terrible night. He had gone into the fire to save a life, but he now understood. The moment he reached out his hand to that tiny creature, he wasn't just saving him. He was saving himself from loneliness, from the silence of an empty apartment, from the routine. This little ginger cat, born of fire and ash, had brought more light into his life than the most powerful flashlight. He had become his family, his home, his quiet triumph. The story of the firefighter and the rescued kitten could have remained a local legend at Engine 15, but stories like this rarely stay in the shadows. One day, a young reporter from a local TV station named Sarah came to the firehouse. She had been assigned a light, feel-good piece to round out the evening news. She expected to see a regular cat and a firefighter who would tell a rehearsed story. She was not prepared for what she actually found. She wasn't met by just a cat. She was met by the one in charge. Ash, now large and majestic, patrolled the station with the confidence of a lion in his pride. He was sitting on the dispatcher's desk, lazily observing the hustle and bustle. He wasn't afraid of strangers or the camera. He was home. Sarah started with Captain Mike, expecting a few dry phrases, but the captain, taking off his cap and stroking his gray mustache, spoke of Ash with unexpected warmth. "He's not a pet, ma'am. He's our barometer. When the guys come back from a rough call, burned out, exhausted, they don't go to a shrink. They go and pet that brazen fur ball, and his purr washes away more soot from the soul than any shower can." Then she saw Kevin, who proudly showed her Ash's post, a corner with a multi-level scratching post they had built from old crates, and a board with a joke feeding duty roster. Everyone had contributed. This wasn't one man's hobby. It was a collective project, held together by love for a small creature. But the main interview was with Jake. They sat to the side, while the cameraman filmed Ash gracefully leaping onto the hood of the gleaming fire engine. Sarah asked the question that had been on her mind from the start. In that situation, in that chaos, why did you risk it for him? He was just a kitten. Jake paused for a moment, looking at his ginger friend. His answer was quiet, but it held the entire essence of their story. When you go into a burning building, all you see is destruction. The things people loved, built, poured their souls into. It all turns to ash, and you can't do anything about it but stop the fire. But in that moment, I didn't just see a kitten. I saw a tiny chance. A chance not just to stop the destruction, but to save something whole, something alive, to carry new life out of that hell instead of just loss. He looked back at Sarah, and there wasn't a hint of bravado in his eyes. I thought I was giving him a second chance. Turns out, he was the one giving one to me, to all of us. He's a daily reminder that even after the worst fire, there's always room for something new, or something good. The final shot of Sarah's story, which ended up being the lead segment on the evening news, was captured by accident. Jake, forgetting the camera, simply walked over to Ash, scooped him up, and pressed his cheek against the top of his ginger head. And the cat, in response, purred loud enough for the whole firehouse to hear. It wasn't just a sound. It was the sound of home. The sound of a life that was saved, and in turn, saved so many others.